Welcome to Deep Dive, the place where we dive deep into last week's sermon. This is the place you get to hear things that maybe hit the cutting room floor, extra thoughts that we might have had, things we wanted to say but didn't say, or even ways that the message impacts us as we try to live out walking and practicing the way of Jesus in our lives. So, glad you're here, taking time to tune in with me. We are almost at the end of our series in Nehemiah, and it has been a journey, seeing ebbs and flows of the way God's been at work through his people, through Nehemiah leading God's people, and seeing the walls of the city rebuilt. Last week, we had Graham Gibson bring a great message talking about the worship and the act and heart posture of worship that we saw as God's people were celebrating seeing a wall rebuilt and restored. And as Graham talked about, the heartbeat, the response of those that are rebuilt by God is worship. And he also challenged us, reminded us, encouraged us to think that worship isn't just contained and captured in one way, in one means. Like, it isn't just this always joyous celebration, the gathering together, singing and trumpets and all sorts of stuff, but worship is lived in the everyday life as we make choices and decisions to choose to put God first in a place of prominence and a place of priority. And so as we work through chapter 12 in Nehemiah, we continue to see how Nehemiah tries to build into God's people an idea and an understanding that worship impacts all areas of our life. And it happens on the everyday, the ways when we're leaving the building and heading into our work week, when we show up at school on Monday, when we deal with our families during the week, where we interact with our neighbors and our friends and coworkers. And worship is expressed in each of those different ways and different places. On Sunday, I was talking about the idea of there's ways that we can determine what becomes something that we worship. Part of Graham's comment, teaching a couple weeks ago, was this idea that God is to be worshiped. And God speaks that to us. We read it in Exodus as he gives his rules, guidelines for people to follow, to live a life honoring him. It says, have no other gods except for me. And yet so often, so frequently in life that we place other things in positions of prominence. They can be good things. They're not necessarily bad things, but they just take that place of prominence and priority in our life. And so I said, there's three different ways I think we can look at our lives and maybe pull back the covers a little bit to reveal that which we worship, who we worship or what we worship. I said one of the areas that we can pull back and look at the covers is what do our calendars look like? Take a scroll through your iPhone and your iCalendar and see what is taking places of prominence. Where are you filling your time? How are you using it? There's the typical things that we have to do, places of work and school, and those fill our time. But what do we do in the excess, in the margins? How do we choose to use that? Is it something that we choose to continue to pursue God or be used by God to continue to walk with him? Or is it about our own desires and the things that we want to do? The second place I said we could determine what we worship or who we worship is by looking at our search history. Maybe looking at the screen time report we get on our iPhones to say, where am I spending my time? What's consuming those margins as I travel to different places, as I do different things? Are they things that show and reveal that God is in that position and place of prominence or priority? And then the third one I said that we could look at is we could look at our bank statements. How are we spending our money? There's the typical places of bills and things that we have that are on the forefront for us, but it really reveals where we place a priority and how we determine what is first and foremost in our lives. And Nehemiah talks in chapter 12, the second half of chapter 12, or near the end, the call on God's people to bring the first fruits into the storehouse, bring in the tithes from the fields, celebrate what God is doing through the community of faith and continue to see that funded and growing. And lots of times I think we can look at how we spend our money and we have to make decisions to say, well, it's the extra that I have that I'll use and bring back to God to worship him, to give in tithes and offerings. And yet an act of worship is saying, God, you have my whole heart and my whole life. And I want to honor you with all my energy, my time, my talents, my resources, that it would worship you. It's what Paul writes about as he's writing in Romans chapter 12. We read this. It says, this is what worship can look like. And it says, so dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because of all he has done for you, right? It's recognizing his place of worth and prominence. It says, let them be a holy sacrifice, the kind he will find acceptable. This is truly the way to worship him. It says, don't copy the customs, behaviors of the world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. And then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. Paul's words, encouragement to say, this is an act of worship, to bring all that you have, surrendering your heart, surrendering your time, your talents, your resources, and saying, God, would you use it and use me to be one who carries forth the message of the kingdom in all the world, to carry with us the message of God's good news of great joy that's found in and through Christ, to demonstrate and live a practice of his love for people as we experience his love for us. So, encourage you to take some time, maybe even pull back the covers a little bit in your own life and looking at what do we worship? What takes that position and place of prominence? Check it out. Look at your bank statement. Check out your search history and check out your calendar and say, God, are you that one who is a position of prominence? Do I make space for you and continue to seek after you, or do I search after other things? Love to hear what you think. Love to hear how God stirs in your heart with that. As always, you can drop a comment in the section below, or if you want to hear more on this and a fuller version of this, you can definitely check out our YouTube channel that has the full message from Sunday. But would love to hear from you. Hope you have a great week. Thanks for taking time to tune in with us on Deep Dive.